Another one, a lot of blowback and hesitation on the forms. And with so many buyers, it's hard to get those buyers forms signed. Potentially, yes. And I received an email today from someone on our team that had an open house this weekend. It said that there was a bunch of buyers that came in without their agents who said they hadn't signed anything, which is not advised at all. For one thing, you're going to lose your client if you do not have a buyer rep agreement in place with them and you're allowing them to just go and attend these open houses like you did before. You're going to lose your client because it'd be very easy for the listing agent to just say, hey, you haven't signed anything with anybody? Great. If you want to make an offer on this house, sign here. And boom, you just lost your buyer. I do not recommend doing that. If you're having a hard time with the forms, we've had some previous sessions on this. One of them was with Jeff Lobb, where we went over scripts and different things like that, handling objections with getting these signed. It boils down to, and I've been saying this since forever, but especially since the beginning of this year when NAR settlement was really gaining steam and we were getting close to that, you have to show your value as a buyer's agent. If you're not showing your value, they're not going to sign this agreement with you. So you really have to know how to handle that. And if you actually read through the buyer rep agreement, it explains things very well on what you're going to be doing, what are the expectations of the buyer working with you, and everything else. So there's some really good information actually in that form itself on presenting this to the actual buyers. Also, they came out with the buyer compensation agreement, advisory, not agreement, the BCA, another good one to read through because that helps the sellers and the buyers understand how things work now. So they did create some forms for this. But if you're having a hard time, maybe check out that PSRA and just say, hey, we need to have a compensation agreement in place. This is only for this property that you're viewing with me today. And if we find that we're incompatible to work with each other, then you can go about your merry way. But because I am doing work as a real estate agent for you on this particular property, if you were to buy this particular property, I would be entitled to compensation for which I'm going to negotiate for you anyways with the seller. So you want to make sure that is very clear that part of your negotiation of you negotiating the terms of the contract, the RPA, the purchase, part of those terms are you negotiating compensation from the seller to pay you and credit against what the buyer owes you. So that's part of the negotiation here as well. So, and a part of your service for them. What else we have? When working with buyers under the new guidelines, do you recommend sign a buyer rep immediately and for how long? By the way, nice to meet everyone. I'm new to Rise. Hello, iPhone. So when working with buyers under new guidelines, do you recommend signing buyer representation immediately and for how long? This is going to be different on every scenario. It's like going to a listing appointment and you have maybe a very standoffish homeowner, maybe they've had bad experience in the past and they're like, there is no way I'm going to sign a 6-month listing agreement with you. I will give you 2 months to sell this home, take it or leave it. And you say, fine, I'll do a 2 month in hopes for an extension. It's the same thing or similar here with the buyers. If this is a brand new buyer, they found you through your marketing efforts, you've not known each other in the past, there's no relationship there. Yes, getting the buyer rep agreement signed right then can be a challenge. And that's why, or that's where the PSRA, the property showing agreement, might be a little more beneficial for you because it's a little less aggressive, in my opinion. And that would probably be my preferred if it's someone I'm just starting to work with, their lead that came in, and I'm trying to develop this relationship with them. And that's even a little different now too. Before you're just talking, maybe showing a home here and there. And now you have to have a compensation agreement in place in order to tour the home. That's where I would probably break out that PSRA and say, look, happy to show you this home. In the eyes of the law that changed this year, I am working with you and therefore I have to have a compensation agreement in place. It's only going to be for this home and the other one we're going to see afterwards. And then after that, if we don't want to work together, then great. If so, we'll just continue. And maybe at some point you can get that BRBC signed. Another best practice that I've heard a lot of agents is not going for the full 3 months. The default timeline on the BRBC is 3 months now. Maybe you want to do it for a month to start out, and that's your pitch to them. Hey, let's work together for a month, a week, 2 weeks, whatever, and see how things go. If you like my service, then we can always extend. If not, then you can be on your merry way. It's also, you have to remember that it's a non-exclusive agreement in the beginning. That's what it's defaulted to. You can make it exclusive, which means, yes, at that point, you can send your clients out to the open houses and they're gonna owe you compensation if they buy something, right? If you have an exclusive. But it's defaulted to non-exclusive, meaning you have to do work, which we just went over what is the definition of working with a buyer. You have to fall within that definition in order to obtain commission for that particular property. So if you have a non-exclusive buyer representation agreement in place, if you go and tour homes with them, they're going to owe you compensation if they purchase any of those homes. However, if they walk into an open house and love it and do not call you and sign a compensation agreement with the listing agent to purchase that home, you will not be entitled to compensation because you did not do work on that particular house. Now, did you introduce them to the house? Were you like, hey, there's an open house this weekend? Okay, now we're getting into working with the buyer a little bit. But if you just have them on new property alerts from MLS or your CRM or your IDX or whatever, and they're getting new properties listed from you, and they're like, oh, this one looks cool, and they don't say anything, that's not working with the buyer. Automatic emails going out, stuff like that is not working with the buyer per their definition. So you have to actually do work in order to obtain, unless you have an exclusive. I guess I don't know, I rambled a little bit. Hopefully that answers that question a little bit, though. I think it's going to be a case by case scenario unless you have a very rigid process on how you intake buyers and work with people. And in that case, I'm going to guess you probably have more business than you can deal with, which is not a bad thing. But I think it's case by case. If they seem very standoffish, I might introduce that PSRA instead of the BRBC instead. Oh, hey, Sean. So that's who the new agent was. So thanks for coming on. Hopefully that answered your question there. If there's any other questions, throw them in the chat, raise your hand, and we can discuss as well. But I know it's still all new and there are some challenges still, but I think for the most part, it seems like it's going over okay. At least the process of it is going okay. There is still some challenges, like Manny said, about getting buyers to agree to sign these compensation agreements. I think that will lessen in time. A lot of this is still very new to the public, and explaining these forms and getting someone to sign a buyer rep agreement when we've been doing business for however long you've been doing business, you weren't using the buyer rep agreement because it was always difficult to get them to sign it. This is something new for us too, and we'll get better at it with practice. There's a lot of resources out there. NAR, CAR both have a lot of resources, within their websites. They're pretty decent. Truthfully, YouTube, if you go on there, you'll probably find some coaches and things like that offering some free advice on what they're doing to get these agreements signed, best practices, handling objections, things like that. I would probably, if you're struggling, that's where I would go, is probably YouTube, and watch some of that stuff as well if you're just still struggling with your pitch, and see what other people are doing and seeing what their successes are.